Good morning, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of the Learners Podcast. I am very excited here to be talking with my Slack friend. Okay, sometimes you make friends on Slack in these Slack communities, and that's where I met this individual. Chris Nguyen is the founder of UX Playbook, and he is joining us today to talk a lot about the state of design and what's going on in the industry, what's changing, what are some of the challenges he sees, and maybe even a little bit about his transition to being more of an entrepreneur as well. So welcome, Chris. It's great to see you again.
Yeah, thank you for having me on. And yes, as you said, Slack friend, and you helped me out a lot. So I'm very happy to be on and just shooting the shit with you.
I appreciate it. Folks, if you ever need help with like sponsorship stuff, just shoot me an email, okay? I've learned a lot of tough lessons, and there's nothing more cathartic for me than having conversations and helping people make more money from sponsorships. Anyway, we're not here to talk about that. Chris, can you give like just a super brief overview of what UX Playbook is? Because I know you've been a designer for a long time. You built this thing up, and we'll talk more about that. But just what is the thing that you've been making for a long time here?
Yeah, so I started UX Playbook back in 2020 as an experiment, but it's me helping designers navigate a fuzzy career and turn it into more of a focused one through playbooks, courses, and coaching. Playbooks being a recipe guide to execute UX activities, courses, more hand-holding video, sort of more immersive type material, and then coaching, which all education in my eyes, I believe, it's personalized, right? Hyper-personalized to that individual, to their scenario, to their situation. So UX Playbook is this, or my take on UX education, things I wanted to have as a self-taught designer that now I'm building for other designers out there.
I feel like that's the story of so many of these communities and like learning platforms and programs that have started, which is like, shit, this is the stuff that I wanted when I was started. Why is it so hard? Let's make it a little bit easier for the next people. That resonates with me for sure. I'd like to start with just kind of like, I feel like a lot of different roles within the tech company are going through a lot of change right now. Right. And, to some extent you could say it's AI. It's also just the economic situation that we're in. When you look back on specifically the years from like 2020 to 2024, what were some of the headwinds, tailwinds that you were kind of seeing, some of those changes that have been maybe a little bit challenging to kind of adapt to as a designer?
I think that one of the major ones is just finding work, like the different approach to work for, let's just say I applied for my head of design role in 2019. It was wildly different to what I'm suggesting people do now after, the pandemic. I think there's a lot more weight, or even more weight and even more expectations from candidates who apply to different companies. So with all the layoffs that's been going on, like it's the employer's market, right? They have the pick and choose of the talent. So therefore, they can be a bit pickier, and they can be like, okay, well, maybe I want to hire an ex-Google employee, or maybe I want, top 5 companies. Who's this person? So if you're a candidate on the other side, let's just say with a few years of experience, it's really hard to get into the industry. And obviously, this has caused a massive uproar in the community, especially the online community. And I've tried to help solve that problem by, building courses and material and how I would apply for a role today. But yeah, that's been definitely a huge thing.
I noticed a lot of what you've had on your site is, and what you talk about is this idea of like the Scrappy Designer, right? And many of the designers that I've known and worked with have been, I'm going to say like perfectionist. That's not really the right word, but this sense of like the craft isn't great unless it's just right. There's no 80% done. We can't, and that seems to be a little bit at odds with maybe some of what you've been suggesting around how we handle, whether it's landing the next job, getting that promotion, figuring out how to get on the project that you want. What do you think are some of the things that are that can help people kind of like cover that gap, because especially if you've been in like some sort of design education program, like whether it's college or an art school or something like that, that's not really how you're taught the work is necessarily done, right?
Yeah. So a funny thing, the word scrappy. So I was running user research on my website, and actually one of the users suggested they looked at that word scrappy and they're like, I don't like it. Why is that word there? And they just fixated on that word. And that made me laugh. And the fact that I'm not changing it is also something I'm double downing on, because
it feels like this is a hill that you're going to stand on and die on, like that's what this word means to you.
Yeah. I can be a perfectionist, but I think the most I've learned is when I've been scrappy and just kind of pushed through without like looking at every detail and sort of revisiting that thing over and over again, just that forward momentum. So I think that's huge. To be scrappy means you have to kind of move forward, which anyway, and there's no like perfect choice, right? And I think that this is inherent in my personality anyway. So I think that's kind of a place I'm coming from. Is like, I think, especially early in your career, or this is what worked for me, which is like I was scrappy, and therefore I got a lot of experience and was asked to do things that I'm not qualified for.
But let's talk a bit more about that, because when you go back to some of those early IC roles, right? Yeah. Or that you were in, what were some of those stories where you got that extra opportunity because you shipped something that wasn't perfect, or that didn't have that full attention, or whatever it is, however you want to frame it, as in it's not 100%, that allowed you, like, what were some of those projects and how did that end up supporting your growth later on?
Sure. So I was a self-taught designer, but before that, I was in a digital marketing role. So I was doing like, I was selling ads for a website, basically, right? I was like that kind of person. And then my boss wanted to redesign the website where we sold ads. So I was like, I'll do it. I kind of like this design thing because I was designing decks and emails and all this stuff. So I just took that opportunity, and from designing that website, which is the core product offering at the time, in a digital marketing role, I then sort of leveraged that, saying like, oh, I've done this before. Here's how many visitors we have, into my first product design role. I don't think I would have got an opportunity to be, quote unquote, a paid designer if I didn't do that. And the funny thing is, I didn't even hear of Sketch. Like, Sketch was somewhere else. So I was using Photoshop, but because my laptop is old, right? I just hated it. So guess what? I designed the whole website in Keynote, the presentation software.
That's hilarious.
Yeah. And just because for me, it was so easy. It had like the guidelines, and it was just like copy and paste, like not like clunky ass Photoshop. So for me, like, that was one element of scrappiness, where I was just like, hey, if I was interested in it, or I think that this is a rabbit hole that's worth diving into, I would just say, okay, can you let me do it? Like, I'll try. And so I took on that project and we launched it on like literally screenshots of my Keynote, right? Like, I just sent the developer the PDF or whatever it is, and he built it. And that's like, we launched it after a few months. And I think from there on, it was quite clear that I liked design, wanted to do it. Therefore, I would like parlay that into something else, right? And the second story is like scrappiness. I think scrappiness can come in all shapes and sizes. Another example is, okay, so when I first got my design role, one of the first tasks was like, okay, well, we need an Android app, right? And I was like, shit, how do I design that? Like, what? I literally just designed one website in my life. Like, what do I do now? So the first week when I was in the office, in this co-working space, I stayed up till like 1 a.m. at the office. Not because someone told me to, it's because like I was trying to figure out what the hell an Android app is and how you design it, right? Like adopting Sketch as well, and pretending to know what I was doing. And then, from then on, it was like, okay, well, clearly this is something that the employer's value, because after a few months, they were like, okay, well, Chris, you're the only designer here, so we're just going to fly you out to Seattle, and you're going to stay there for 3 months working with the CEO and the CPO at the time. And that was like massive early in career, right? To work directly with the founders and like the head of the organization. So, I think that was, definitely many examples, but those are like some early career IC moments that really kind of embedded that lesson in my head.
That's such a funny thing too. I feel like it's, for a lot of people, sometimes there's like a permission thing of like, I'm not a designer till I've been hired in a design role, and I can, I have a similar story where if you go on my LinkedIn, my first job out of university is as a user researcher at a company. And I promise you, it did not say user researcher on my employment agreement. That is a retrospective adjustment for me to help tell a story. It is a lot of what I did there. And that was one of the things, the reason I got hired was because I did this pro bono research project for a company I thought was doing some really cool stuff. But they just were like, I don't know, you could be the person talking to the community and the users and the whatever. And I was like, sounds great. I didn't even know that was research was a thing. That's whatever. I just thought this was a helpful and useful and interesting thing to do. It's, and I also think the other thing is, I tell this sometimes when I talk to people, I wonder when you're coaching people too, this resonates, but if you want to be the thing, just do the thing. Just keep doing it. Just don't stop. Right. And there's been, obviously the employment side, and there hasn't been as many jobs, and it's been really tough. And I totally can empathize with that. I've been in that situation too. But if you just don't quit and you just keep plugging away at it, and you find, even if they're free projects, tiny projects, super small, maybe you're doing it for your local barbershop, you're redesigning their website, or the local real estate agent or the bakery or whatever it is, but just keep practicing and keep going. Eventually, you just get really good at it if you just keep doing it. And that's part of, it's not perfect. It's maybe a little scrappy, but it's almost a 100% success rate, guaranteed.
Yeah, so my best design advice is exactly what you just said. And they're like, Chris, what's one thing you would tell all designers, especially juniors? I would just be like, just design a lot. That's it. Yeah. Just design as many times as you can. Go through whatever process, break things, and then just remix whatever. But just do it so the uncomfortable becomes the comfortable. That's really it. There's no secret. Like anything is a muscle. If you're learning a language, right? If you're playing the piano, whatever it is, just do it a lot, please. And, everything is on the other side of that hard work. I guess in the instant gratification world we live in, where it's like, what's the hack? What's the framework? What's this? It's like, well, there are these, but nobody's going to do the work for you, right?
Look, everybody wants big muscles and nobody wants to lift heavy stuff. So it's
including
one of
me.
those things. Yeah, same here. Look, I think that's great. That's great advice. What are some of the things you keep when you're doing these, whether it's coaching or the materials? Obviously, the materials that you're making, it's a reflection of a need that you think is out there. What are some of the things that you think you've been hearing a lot more of recently that's new versus maybe 5-10 years ago?
Yeah, well, this has definitely been around for a long time. But I'm coming across it more just because I'm doing a lot more coaching. This definitely happened, when I was a manager managing teams, but it seems to me like there's so much of I don't know what I'm doing, therefore I'm not going to do anything, because the underlying root cause is I don't think I'm good enough. I just have low confidence, low self-esteem. And I'm coming across that way more than I was when I was, in a job. But it seems to me like that is something that's, obviously the test of time. But I'm just coming across that a lot. And I think my job as a coach is not to say oh, here's this pill. It's to try to dive in a little bit deeper and to find the root of the problem that they might be facing. So typically it's not I don't know how to do a portfolio. Like, you can read whatever on the internet. You can ask AI. It'll tell you how to do one. But the fact is that potentially you're scared to be judged by the internet, right? Or that you don't think you're a good writer because that's the schooling system that you were part of, or whatever it is. There's always something deeper than that. And I think, yeah, from a coaching perspective, those are the kind of questions that help them try to answer those questions that that I really like to ask. But in terms of something new, I mean, of course, AI is a huge one, but let's not talk about that.
I agree. We've had a lot of conversations about it. All we're talking about in UX research these days is AI. Yeah. Which obviously is the space I know best. Yeah, one of the things that's kind of coming up, I remember, I think it was, I don't remember who told me this. It's probably like my dad or something, but I was learning to drive. There's no such thing as good drivers and bad drivers. There's experienced drivers and inexperienced drivers, right? And this seems to be a thing that also applies to the craft as well, right? Like, good designer, bad designer, who gives a shit, right? That doesn't make anything. There's people who've designed a lot and people who haven't designed much, right? And obviously there's some people have more innate talent than others, but it probably comes down mostly to that.
Yeah, I wouldn't even consider myself as a good designer. I think I'm a better communicator than I am a designer. And the way I design is very specific, right? Remember that Scrappy approach? That's also a life approach. Like, I'm pretty just try it, see what happens, just do it as lean as possible. So if there was such thing as a good designer, I don't think I fall into that bucket anyway. So yeah, experienced is probably a better way to frame it.
Let's talk about communication a bit, because I feel like, I imagine the time you spent working in Seattle directly with that leadership team was probably pretty informative for a lot of the success you've had later on in your career. What were some of those, that communication has something to do with that. What were some of the big things that you learned from that particular project that was kind of new to you as a designer, that you didn't understand about the kind of thinking and the perspective of folks that are kind of running organizations, no matter how big or small?
God. So like, you're asking me like lessons learned, but all I can think of is like the negatives, which is like really funny. It was a great opportunity and actually a great company to work for, especially being the first designer and working directly with leadership. I think some of the good things that came from it was actually linking back to this coaching thing, where every time I would speak to the CPO, he would register what I say, but he would ask a question, or at least assume that I'm asking something deeper. So it would be like, hey, Alec, what'd you write on the board there? Let's just say that as an example. And he'd be like, it's not what you wrote, it's how you wrote it, the font, the style. So he would always go a layer deeper to try to figure out or help me find the meaning and why I asked that question. So I was just like, whoa, this is like a superpower. And he did this to everybody. And I was like, okay, no wonder why you worked at Real Player, you did all these crazy things, right? That was kind of an eye-opening moment. A bunch of other things that were interesting about this role was the CEO was really good at succinctly telling his story, like, and not afraid to remind everybody. I think I heard him tell his careercation story. So he wrote a book called Careercation, and I probably heard it like 150 times within 2 years. At every event, at every Friday thing, like, very good. And he just hammered that home until everybody kind of drunk the Kool-Aid. And I think that's really important as a founder, because you want to know what you stand for. I think that has also been something I adopted when, let's just say, I do an initiative like, okay, we're going to introduce recognition into the team. Here's why we do wins. Here's why we do fuck ups. Here's why we do these like rituals. So everybody's on the same page, and just keep on repeating until you start to hear that back, from them, which is, I think, really interesting. And then the third thing was, he was, I don't know this exactly, but as I'm talking about it, I'm thinking about it, which is he was really good at, I think from the story perspective, to bring on really awesome investors and advisors. We had folks like we had Mark Roberge from HubSpot. We had a couple of other guys that worked at these giant companies that Sasta, I think we had one of the like co-founders of that on the board as well. So it was just interesting to see how telling his story kind of got him into these circles and people really bought in to what he was doing, even though it was actually nothing special. If you just break down the tool, it's a survey tool. It's like Survey Monkey for employees, right? I guess that was all the rage back then.
There you go. Well, I wonder what you think, like from a design perspective, from like a craft point of view, like that one thing of repeating the same thing over and over again. Is that whether it's managing a team or is it maybe it's part of how the product works itself? Is that a thing that you think translates? Because I've heard this a lot about, people starting companies or whatever it is, and they have to continually evangelize and basically create this propaganda of like, this is who we are. This is why we exist. Don't forget, this is who we are. This is why we exist, all that sort of thing. Does that also translate to a sub-layer of like within a design team or within a product in some way?
I think so. I think if you talk about like design tenets or product principles, I think hammering home that message, so there are at least some guardrails. We're not saying like do interviews like this and that's the only way we do it, but to have a philosophy, and the folks at Basecamp do this really well, right? In terms of like simplify, cut out the BS, no complications and all that stuff, right? That helps them build a better narrative, not only to their customers, but to how they build. Absolutely. And I think, but on the flip side, I do want to add a caveat, which is like, just because it's written on the wall doesn't mean it's right. And like mission, vision, and values and stuff like that, right? So I think we need to be really careful in terms of adjusting those tenets, and are they truly universal? Like if you say be accessible across, like, obviously, but how do we do that? What are the actions and the signals that say we are accessible, not in just the way we communicate, but also in the work? Like, how does that even funnel through? So those kind of stuff is a little bit more fuzzy, but I believe it could work, but definitely some caveats.
Speaking of design principles, are those, in your experience, helpful tools? Like, or do they tend to generally be cliches? Yeah.
I think they're helpful tools from a strategic standpoint to drive home the initiative, but they might not be helpful tools day to day, right? And yes, you're right. They are pretty cliche most of the time, because what else are you going to write, right? You're going to copy from some other tool or whatever, right? Like, you're just going to remix and improve. So yeah, I mean, I've written a bunch of design principles for things and they never get followed through, right? So I think it's more of a tool to kind of maybe connect two teams together, get buy-in from leadership. So yeah, in that sense, I think you're bang on there.
Yeah. We'll never forget the values at Enron were like integrity, honesty, togetherness, some kind of stuff like that. There's a great book about that. I can't remember what it is, that chronicles the fall of Enron, and they make a specific point about their values, and maybe the values, writing them on the wall isn't enough. Mm-hmm. Okay, cool. So, and now you've also transitioned. You're working on something else, right? And I think this is always great. I love hearing about when people who have like specialty in a particular craft start building their own thing, right? So, what's that transition been like for you, and what is it that you're working on right now? Yeah, so
I've been sort of starting my own thing. Like, I've started my own thing and been working on it on the side, but I think in order to solidify the things you are doing, it's really helpful to talk out loud and talk with other people and see if it's useful to them. So I started this tiny community, less than 20 people, and it's designers trying to, or either are entrepreneurs or trying to become founders. So why I started it is what I mentioned, but I think it's, we're on the internet, everybody's all over the world. It's kind of lonely sometimes. So it's like, well, what are designers that are also like business geeks doing? And what's working for them? What's working for me? Maybe we can trade war stories and just kind of see like if this kind of idea exchange is healthy. So far it's been awesome, and see how we can collaborate together. So a tiny community called backlog.design, and just an experiment as well to see if I like it. It's not something that's like I've ever marketed, but it's fun to kind of work in like a tiny group to see what happens.
Folks, you're hearing it here first. Okay. This is breaking news on the Learners Pod. Check it out, backlog.design. Now, Chris, did you build it in a scrappy way? Did you design it in a scrappy way?
Yes, I did. Let me tell you this. Dude, so basically I was like, okay, well, I'm not building it from scratch on Figma, then porting it to Framer. What I'm going to do, and this was the challenge, use only free existing resources in their template market and like smash it together. So that's exactly what I did. I've done lots of iterations, but it basically took me like a day and a half to get up, and it's a Slack channel, and that's it. And there was no payment function for a long time. Even now it's kind of a little bit broken, no onboarding. But as the weeks go by, we're just adding new things for the community to see if people like it. If not, we just won't do it. Yeah.
What's your hope for more designers potentially building their own things? I think one of the things that really stands out for me, I think a lot about us and kind of like what kind of a thing we're trying to make. And I think, you're speaking to this earlier on, this idea of like everyone has their own kind of unique learning journey. That's one thing that we've definitely learned. And if we're going to do something that helps people learn and grow, it really has to be a design-led experience. Now, I'm not a designer. I couldn't design anything if my life depended on it. But, we have two people on our team that are very talented in this space. And so in some ways, like we're like kind of like design-led from like an expertise point of view. There's not a lot of companies that are like this. I think the most famous example is like Airbnb, but everything that's out there, it seems to be very like engineering-led, product management-led / follow the God-given metrics and frameworks from the Silicon Valley gods and whatnot. But it feels like there'd be a lot of great opportunities that are missing being tackled because they're really designer problems rather than technology problems. Do you think about that stuff? Like, do you hope that this is a change that you see of more designers leading companies?
Oh my God, I'm so glad you brought that up. I am so excited about this. Like, I think more designers should do it, right? Because engineers have done it. They've built their own stuff, but designers, you can build your own stuff now with all the tools out there. And with the layoffs, it's kind of like also fine.
What else are you going to do? Right?
What else are you going to do? So launch products. And what I'm really excited for is more opinionated products. So like there's so many to-do list apps. There's so many note-taking apps. There's so many project management apps. But what about the real opinionated ones that say, hey, we believe in something. This is how we think it should be solved. And also an enjoyable experience. It might have flashy animations, might be beautifully designed, like whatever. So software in general, and I agree with you, where it's like these other teams are, building it. So it could be engineering heavy, it could be sales heavy, it could be marketing heavy, or whatever it is. But I think software with a soul is so encapsulating, right? Where when you look at a physical product, like a chair that's been like beautifully designed or something that's crafted, you're just like, oh, like I won't buy it, but that's cool, right? Like that's the kind of feeling that software needs because it's so stale and a little bit intangible in a sense. Like you can click on it, but that doesn't really do anything, right? So I'm really excited for products that are going to be launched and will be launched with this whole new wave of designers that can basically from, pixels to code super easily, and then also market the product. Like, I'm very excited about that. And the one reason I started this community as well is so I could actually, build alongside other people, potentially collaborate, potentially invest, or whatever it is, because I'm excited about what they make, because people make a lot of different things based on ideas come from everywhere. So super stoked about it. And I think that the only way is up, right? I think with all the capabilities, it'll be dumb not to even try.
Couldn't agree more. I mean, let's get designers in the chat wherever you are. Let's get going. Let's get building some stuff, and definitely hit up Chris once you get started. Once you got something out there. Final question for you: as a designer,
yep,
working with other people that are not on your design team, what's like the number one thing that they do that like brightens your day? Like, could be any function where you're just like, oh my God, you're the best. Thank you for bringing this to me.
Yeah, so I think mentioning something they heard, something they experienced, or something like a problem they had that they think design can help solve that. I think that's the best. An example is our HR team at one of the last companies I worked at. We're like, hey, we saw you do this design sprint with the engineering team. We really need to figure out our onboarding process. We're hiring like 60 people a month. Just help us figure it out. And we're like, shit, yeah, let's run a design sprint. Like, thank you for coming to us, because, we'll love to help you solve your problems. Like, let's put that user first, or put the candidate first. And I think that brightens up my day, where they're just like, they don't just jump the gun, or maybe not even jumping the gun, but maybe like just considering us to be that facilitator of problem solving right from the beginning just makes me really happy.
Reminds me of the first job I ever had. There's a pretty talented designer working there, and I was fresh out of school, and I think I was extremely annoying because I would like try and make up my own landing pages for some stuff I wanted to run, and I think it bothered him. And I'm like, well, can you just design it or whatever the thing? And I think it broke his brain the way I was talking to him about this stuff. Years later, I told him, just so you know, man, I'm sorry. I now know that it's not just the pixels, okay? It's how the whole thing works that you do. And he's like, you didn't need to apologize, but I'm glad that you figured that out.
yeah. He crossed you off the list. That
I'm like on the kill list. I'm like, okay, let's get him off there, right? Anyway, Chris, what are the URLs we're going to? We're going to uxplaybook.com? .org, okay.
Yep.
And we're going to backlog.design if you are a designer trying to work on your own projects and you want to join a little community.
That's right.
Thanks for joining me, man. I can't wait to catch up again with you soon. Have a wonderful rest of your day, everybody. Thank you for tuning in. We got more episodes coming your way. If you have any suggestions, people you think would be awesome to talk to, shoot me a DM or an email anytime. I can't wait to hear your recommendations. If you like this episode, feel free to subscribe, give her 5 stars. If you didn't, then just, lay off the phone for a little bit, transition to work at doing something else, and then don't worry about rating it if you didn't like it. Just kidding. Okay, have a great day, everyone. I'll see you next time. Peace.